Hey, how's it going? I'm Pruitt. This is my DM, Jim Davis. And some f***ing times he wants to on all the things that I want to do. I just want to play my game and do whatever the f***ing I want to. And good God, f***ing wants to get up in my and restrict me and my fun? F*** that shit. It's WebDM. I don't want to rain on your parade today. Just like you don't want to rain on your players' parade.
I prefer not to rain on their parades, but sometimes it's necessary. The Tyranny of Fun is a concept and idea that's been boiling in my mind since at least 4th edition, if not sometime in 3rd, in which it seemed like there was this mantra online of just like the game should be fun. Fun above all else. It eventually, I started noticing on internet discussions and things where people were just like, yeah, we got rid of that rule because it wasn't fun. And on one hand, I'm like, good for you.
Right.
You know, you should play the game in a way that is interesting and engaging for you. And if there is a rule that you don't like, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Just get rid of it. But at the same time, I saw this sort of general attitude developing that you must have fun. And there's nothing about this game that should be a drawback or a restriction or anything that besmirches the holy fun that we could be having.
Right, right.
And I started noticing things like,
everybody have fun.
Everybody
Get
have
the
fun.
fuck
It's like
out.
a lot of pressure to have fun.
Yeah.
So this can be kind of a rambling episode, maybe a bit more philosophical than some of our other shows.
And that's fine.
But this is about the tyranny of fun and why limitations in Dungeons and Dragons matter.
Okay.
And why they can be fun and enhance your game and not just be a wet blanket on your fun. Right. So as Dungeons & Dragons has developed over the years, and each edition sort of builds on what came before it, in theory improves upon, but that's not always the case. We've seen a lessening of the restrictions that have been placed on D&D. And one of the things that you pointed out to me when 5th edition first came out, and we were first rolling up characters and you were about to start the Hoard of the Dragon Queen module, is you made a point about it that I thought has been really helpful in looking at 5th edition, which is like they've just started to get rid of restrictions.
Yeah.
And I'd kind of like to get your take on what do you see those things that they've gotten rid of, that no longer constrain players like they used to?
Well, yeah, I mean, first off, you look straight out at race and class restrictions.
Right.
Certain races or classes can only be this race. Or certain races have, you get +2 to this, but you get -1 to that.
Right.
You know, dwarves get minus to what did it used to be?
Charisma, something like that.
Elves, it was strength.
Yeah, or con.
Con. It was halflings, it was strength.
Yeah.
But, you know, to get that +2 to dex, you need a negative
something
because, since you're better at this, you're not as good at this.
Right.
But in 5th edition, it's all pluses, baby. It's all bonus.
Pluses, unless you're a kobold or an orc.
And what the fuck is up with that?
I mean, I don't know. It does stand out.
Why does that happen? If you're gonna do it for everything
you want me to wildly
else,
speculate? I think because they overvalue the physical stats in Dungeons and Dragons, and so when you have a race like the orc, that gets, they might have some more pluses to the physical stats. They feel like, okay, well, we got to balance it out with a negative somewhere else. Personally, I would get rid of those. Yeah. For both kobolds and orcs, get rid of their negative modifier. But just like this idea that in previous editions, if you were an elf, you could never be a paladin. There were no dwarven magic users.
Yeah.
You know, halfling fighters were at best going to top out at 4th to 6th level, depending on what edition it is. Doesn't matter what everybody else is. And so those kinds of restrictions, there was a rationale and a reason behind them as they developed. And then 3rd edition gets rid of multi-classing penalties for the most part. There was that XP, minus 5% for every class you have. I honestly never used the rule.
Yeah, we never used those because they were stupid.
First of all, it looked overly complicated, and it just seemed like that they were moving in a direction towards removing all restrictions on multi-classing and what classes you could take. Why not just go ahead and kill it? I think at one point we toyed with getting bonus XP if you did take levels in your class's favorite class or your race's favorite class. I really can't remember how they did it in 4th edition, but certainly in 5th edition, like all of those things, 2-weapon fighting out. All of the restrictions that used to be placed on ranged combat, which kind of reined it in and made it, on par with melee between feats and just the way the rules are set up. Ranged combat is like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, there's no firing into melee penalty now.
Yeah, there's just not. I mean, there's variant rules, and everybody has a house rule about it. All of those things were getting in the way of our fun, and now we don't have to worry about them. And so why aren't we all having just the most amazing time? Maybe we are,
Yeah.
That's entirely possible. To me, some of the things that 5th edition has either the restrictions that it's gotten rid of or rules that people ignore at the table are kind of the restrictions that I'm thinking of and ways that you can make them fun.
Because also, another one in that same vein, Wizard School restrictions. If I wanted to be an evoker, I couldn't be an abjurer.
Right. To me, it's 2nd edition. The sort of the wheel, or each wizard school has an opposed one. 3rd edition kind of did it where you had some choice in the matter.
Yeah, it was this or that.
This or that.
Or,
but
you
could
get
never
to pick
be
a school.
Right. It could never be divination. You know, so there were some things that they were trying to do. I find with 5th edition that the magic users that I've seen in play and have played myself, or the wizards in this case, always tend to have the same sort of spells. Yeah. And I guess on the one hand, that's good. It should be that the wizard, when they show up to the table, they can keep a fireball in their back pocket, regardless of what kind of wizard they are, because they might need to use a fireball. They can keep a dispel magic or a counter spell in their back pocket because they need that regardless of what kind they are. But it does lead to this kind of homogenous wizard spell list that there are clearly some spells that are better than others. Yeah. And you would be remiss to not take them or not acquire them at some point. You don't need all of them, but some of them are like top picks. If you go to one of these class guides, they're the ones that are always in gold or bright blue or whatever. Maybe you want some more variety there, and you want 2 wizards that are different, not just have different class abilities, but to take completely different spell loadouts. I can see those things as ways to offer meaningful choice and variety in your game. I'm looking at like Encumbrance. Encumbrance is a rule that seems to get thrown out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and honestly, Jim, that weighs heavy on me.
Tell me, how heavy does it weigh? Is it a medium load? Is it a heavy load?
I don't know. I mean, I would say I'm, a 10 strength. Okay. So that means I can carry around 150 pounds.
Right, okay.
Do you think that that's normal?
It doesn't feel right to me.
Could a normal 165-pound guy of average strength with 150 pounds of gear, I'm good. I'm good.
I would say
just going backpacking, guys.
As someone who does carry around an extra person with me, you feel it. You feel it in your joints. You feel it in your back. You feel it in your muscles. Right. After a long day of exercise, it's like, man, I sure could stand to lose some weight. And I think like when you apply that kind of real world experience to Encumbrance, and you just say like, oh, it's some extra weight that your character can carry, I can see why tables might, one of the first rules that they might axe and ignore completely are Encumbrance or carrying capacity. Yeah. Even looking at the variant rule in the PHB, actually being encumbered.
Yeah, because it does lower, because it's like 5 if you're moderately. It's times 5.
Yeah.
And then it's times 10 for heavily encumbered.
And then it's times 10. So Encumbrance is clearly one of those rules where it's, first off, in some versions of D&D, Encumbrance is absolutely important. Right. It is important to know how much you can carry, because your goal is to get as much loot out of the dungeon as possible.
Well, that's, yeah.
If you're not keeping strict, meticulous Encumbrance records, then you're not going to face those dilemmas of like, there's too much gold here. We should have hired that porter and got that mule, except they got eaten by the random encounter on the first level. Did you not prepare Tensor's floating disc?
Well, should have hired a couple of first level hirelings, or wizard hirelings, just so like you're here to cast Tensor's floating disc.
Cast Tensor's floating disc, and then you got to hire guards to keep them safe. So, like, that's a style of D&D that I personally absolutely love.
Well, it's how we played 2nd edition.
Right.
It was always an issue. You found the stuff. You took what you could, you took the rest of it and buried it somewhere else. And then you came back with a shitload of people and tried to pick it up.
Try to get it back. In that kind of D&D, Encumbrance is very important. In the Save the World, Quest for Good kind of D&D, Encumbrance isn't that important. Right. But maybe you're a DM that wants to go, yeah, where are you keeping all those great swords, Mr. Fighter? So here's some alternative systems I could think of. One of them is a system that Lamentations of the Flame Princess, a retro clone D&D game, uses to sort of like convert all weights into stones. First off, it has a medieval feel to it. Yeah. As opposed to pounds, you can carry up to 17 stone of equipment or something. Yeah. It would require reworking the weights in the equipment section of the player's handbook, but the equipment section of the player's handbook's kind of weak to begin with. So sort of like doing some work to refigure how much things weigh. The reason I would do this is because it keeps the numbers smaller. One of the things is your players just might not want to add up that much. You rate things in terms of how many stones they weigh, which I guess is what, 14 pounds?
It's like,
it could be whatever you want, really.
It could be whatever you want. I think it's like 14 pounds, because when I had my barbarian Roscoe 3 stone, that was why his name was that, because he weighed like 42 pounds or whatever, 43 pounds, whatever.
You know, doing that is one way, sort of just using a different unit of measurement so that they're not dealing with such inflated numbers, and that maybe that would help. I'm also a fan of the video game method of Encumbrance, which is like, you have some slots. So you've got a chest slot and a head slot and 2 hands, and a belt pouch is worth 1 slot, and a belt can hold up to 4 belt pouches, and a backpack is between 16 to 20 slots, and a week's worth of ration takes up a slot. A system like that, first off, there's a frame of reference for a lot of D&Ders. We can't ignore the fact that video games are a part of the culture.
Yes.
And are part of all of our experiences, and it's a frame of reference. That's how it works in Diablo. That's how it works in a ton of RPGs. Where you just have some slots.
You can fit it on the grid.
Fit it on the grid. You got Tetris it in.
Move shit. Yeah. Got to start learning. Bring Tetris back into it.
Right.
Inventory becomes a mini game at that point.
Inventory does become a mini game. So you can kind of instead, you know, maybe there's like a sheet that you can make up for your character. So like a silhouette of their character with each of the slots on it. It just becomes a part of the. I don't have a PDF of that. Nobody asked me for one. I'm not a graphic artist. I'm sure we could Google it and find out.
He does do slam poetry where he cusses a lot, so he is a graphic artist in that
respect. But that's because I love slam poetry.
Yeah.
I don't. So like that's another way that I would do Encumbrance. I think if I was running a 5th edition game, that's how I would run. You can have X many. Your belt can hold 4 things. One of those is a scabbard. 3 of those are belt pouches. You can have a backpack. You can carry something in your hands. Your armor takes up most of your body slots.
Yeah.
Like that's just how it is. And I think that can be a way. Why would you want to track Encumbrance? Because it might matter in a fight. Yeah. There's a reason why in our own world people stopped wearing heavy plate armor, because it's heavy and cumbersome. Yes, there was a time when people did cartwheels in it.
That's true.
But that was not always the case. Yeah. And once it became viable to start shedding some of that armor, soldiers in our own world did. So maybe that'd be a reason why you want to track that. You want to give fighters a real, you know, if they want to wear heavy plate armor, it's going to come with a cost, and that's mobility. Maybe you are running a more dungeon crawl type adventure where how much you can carry is a concern, and you don't want to have to deal with adding. Another one I'm looking at are things that get used up all the time, that usually just get written down once on a piece of paper and your character sheet. Those are ammunition and rations. Ammunition maybe less so. I do think DMs sort of maybe make their ranged characters keep track of ammunition. Mm-hmm. But the reason why you might want to is because maybe you're running a game where resources are scarce and where every arrow has to count.
Right.
And there are some games where your ranger can just have a quiver and they always have arrows, where your crossbow wielding fighter is just, that's what they've got. But in a lot of games, you want to keep track of that ammunition because maybe you're out in the wilderness and it's scarce. Maybe you want to actually give the ribbon abilities that the arcane archer has, if it ever makes it into a main rulebook, mean something. And the fact that they can summon arrows means that everyone else does have to keep track of their arrows now.
If you're in an environment that is scarce in resources, you don't have the wood and the feathers and the arrowheads to make
or
arrows.
The time.
Or the time.
Right.
Maybe you're running a more fast-paced campaign that you're constantly under siege at all times, and you have to, you don't have time to just sit around and make 20 arrows.
Right.
So in that case, though, as the DM, people shooting arrows all the time.
People shooting arrows all the time.
Do all those arrows always have to break?
It seems like arrows break in D&D like a lot more than they do in my experience. Now I'm thinking of like mostly just the target shooting that I've done, but and obviously different materials. But in my mind, I think arrows break way too often in D&D campaigns. Certainly in the ones that I've played, I'd probably put arrow breakage at somewhere between 10 to 20%. Yeah. And otherwise, it's like, can you find it if there's a lot of vegetation or undergrowth or something in a wilderness environment? You might just not be able to find the arrow. Yeah. Perhaps, that ogre that you just unleashed 8 arrows into breaks them all off or something like that. Those are ways in which you're not going to recover your arrows.
Or if you're in a stone cavern.
Or if you're in a cavern or something, yeah.
Or maybe the enemy you're firing against, maybe they have heavy armor, and that increases the chance of it breaking.
Right.
Right. But if you're firing against a wizard, who has nothing, doesn't use a shield to try to stop it, nothing, and it's just going in through a robe into soft tissue.
First off, those wizards should be wearing silk robes so that they can easily pop the arrows out afterwards, right? Like that's just what the Mongols did it.
The
samurai, the Apache.
Did that.
You know what I'm saying?
Pull out those bullet slugs.
Just pull them out. You know, first off, silk robes, wizards. Come on, guys, get with the program. Silk armor, just in general, is probably something that should be in D&D. The broader point I'm making about ammunition is that keep track of it. It's worthwhile to keep track of it. And there are situations where ammo scarcity should be a part of the dilemma.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think that you should probably allow those ranged characters to recover most of the ammunition they're firing, and particularly if it's magical ammunition. If your arrow's like a +1 arrow, maybe it's tougher, made of a different substance or material. Maybe the magic of it keeps it together longer. Maybe that's why it's tough, is because, or why it's a +1 or +2, is because it's so durable.
We covered a lot of things where 5th edition took away limitations.
Yes.
Now they added one huge one.
They added one huge one.
And they did it to spellcasters.
They did it to spellcasters.
Mentioned it before, but let's concentrate on it for a second.
So concentration is my favorite rule to love and hate.
Right.
I think overall for the game, concentration has been a great mechanic.
Yes.
For reining in the power of spellcasters and making it so that they don't dominate as much as they did, say, in 3rd edition, which is the nearest sort of touchstone for it. At the same time, it's very frustrating as someone who is used to that power of spellcasters to be like, I can only concentrate on one of these spells at once.
What's the matter, Jim? You don't want you miss the days of having stone skin invisibility flying.
Yes,
while,
I do. Absolutely. I do miss the days of having 8 stacked spells and having to keep track of them with their separate durations, and all of them have a different DC for dispel magic. Yes, I did miss that, even if it was tedious. So I think concentration is good for the game overall, and it forces the players of magic users, not just wizards but clerics and druids, etc., to make a hard choice about what they're going to use their concentration for. There are some ways, using Glyphs of Warding, depending on how your DM interprets what counts as a harmful spell. Or just interprets the language of the spell. Potions are obviously another way to get some kind of magical effect without needing concentration. I'm a big fan of unlocking everyone in the party's concentration slots, including the spellcasters. That means giving them rings of spell storing, the few wands or rods or magic items that those non-casters can use. As a DM, you need to ask yourself, are you going to try to find ways to give your magic users the opportunity to have extra concentration spells? So some ideas that I've toyed with are, benefit of a familiar is a familiar can concentrate on a spell. And it has to be touching you, otherwise is vulnerable. You know, someone might, they might see a wizard with a familiar and know, we got to kill that owl. That owl boosts the magic of that wizard.
Well, it kind of taken off of the Pact of the Raven Queen or whatever. The patron, the Raven Queen, where she gives you another familiar that gives you some boosts, but it has to be perched on your shoulder. Kind of taking it for that, and also it keeps the familiar from being out and about. Right. Because it's on the wizard's shoulder. Because otherwise, what I would be like, cast that spell, and then I want you over there behind that tree.
Right. Yes. No.
Completely out of sight.
It's got to be touching. It might be hidden in a pocket. It might be something, but it's got to be on their person. I've thought about using an epic boon. Sort of the charms and boons that come at the end of the magic item section. That an epic boon, just unlocking another spellcasting concentration slot. There's a lot of different ways that I play with it, but you could
just do a magic item.
Just do a magic item. There was that one that gave you an extra ring. Let you wear an extra ring. So
the mummy's hand?
The mummy's hand. So maybe there's like a crown that concentrates on it. I'd probably make it an intelligent item in and of itself, so that you have to deal with the personality differences there. But I kind
of like the idea of a lantern that you have to light, and as long as it's lit up, it will stay lit for the concentration. But if somebody, all you have to do is you don't even have to dispel it. If somebody blows out the light in that lantern, the spell goes away. I don't know. So it's like a big reward, but the risk to it, it's very easy to just knock it out of the hand.
Anything I think that ties a game mechanic to an effect that's in the actual game world. It's a flame that you do. It's not just like, oh, you have an extra concentration slot. It's like this benefit they're getting can be taken away by the actions of someone else. Same with sort of like the familiar. I really like that about 5th edition. And, you know, there's a time and a place for no limits. There's a time and a place to say yes to your players, and I think D&D works best when the DM approaches it from an improv perspective, and it's yes and everybody approaches it that way, and they feed off of each other's imagination, and they're not negating each other. They're not saying my idea of fun is better than your idea of fun, but you take what a player says, and you're like, yes, that's an awesome idea. You validate it, and you build on it.
Right.
There's a place for that, but when we're talking about world building, it might be that there are just no elven clerics. They are all druids. It might just be that there really are no dwarven arcane magic users. Channel magic in that way. There can be clerics, maybe druids, depending on your interpretation of them. And so those old school style class and race restrictions, there's a place for those in the world building phase of your D&D. And I really see the no restrictions at sort of philosophy behind D&D and the later editions of it at work in the race and classes of the player's handbook, because there's this kind of general prevailing attitude that the stuff that's in the player's handbook, you cannot touch it, and a player can show up with any old random thing they made. Doesn't matter if there's no dragonborn in your world. It's in the player's handbook. It might be behind a section that says this is an optional rule, or it might be in the non-standard races section of the player's handbook, but it's in the player's handbook. And if you're just a random player, picks this game up, starts reading it, you've made a couple of characters and you're looking for a gaming group, you know, you might feel kind of put out that the DM says, well, you know, you can't have this, shouldn't have that. So this is why talking about your expectations, setting up the game world ahead of time, and as a player being flexible and saying like, yeah, okay, I can't play a tiefling because there are no tieflings in this setting.
Yeah,
you know,
I've seen, you know, on Reddit forums, stuff like that. People are like, oh, I don't allow tieflings or Aasimar or Dragonborn in my world, and it's just like,
yeah, and some DMs go overboard. As in most things. I mean, everything I say should be taken with a huge grain of salt. But in most things, there's like two extremes, and we're looking for the happy middle.
Right.
Restrictions on things can be an important tool of world building, and DMs should feel free to say, this isn't in, this is. You can play a monk, but they're only from this one monastery.
Right.
They're not from all over.
Right.
You can play a dragonborn, but you can't just play any old dragonborn. It's got to be like this, because this is how I tie it into my world.
Right. So compromising on the rules doesn't have to compromise your fun.
Exactly.
Right.
And having restrictions and having limitations and having it not just be a gonzo free-for-all, which is freaking fun, right? Like,
well, I mean, just like an example of like when we're playing, okay, and we started. I don't want to start a whole debate about rolling versus point buy, but
no,
that's not what this is about.
Right.
But we roll at our table.
Yes.
We usually do 46, drop the lowest.
But to be clear, I don't care.
Yeah, I know you don't care, but what has come about over years of playing, what has evolved, and this is generally how everybody at our table rolls a character. 46, drop the lowest. We roll that 7 times, drop the lowest.
Drop the lowest, yes.
So you have another chance to get another good roll. Right. And, you know, when I talk about some people, they're like, oh, that's just, it's like, it's one extra roll.
Yeah.
Right? To us, we normally kind of think of it as, or at least I do, like heroes, adventure. Regular people will just stay on the farm.
I'll just stay there.
Because if that incident happens where the goblins attack and they try to, they're probably going to get killed. Whereas the hero will step up, kill the goblin, realize I can do something more than just farm a field.
Right.
Not that there's not any honor in farming fields.
Listen, there's a deep game in Dungeons & Dragons somewhere where you're just a farmer and you have to overcome experience challenges related to the season. Anyway, sorry, that's where I'm going. It'll be a 3rd edition.
Soil's gone to rot.
Soil's gone to rot. Should have left the field fallow.
Yeah.
Finish your thoughts. Sorry.
But even that is, compared to what's in the book, a loosening of the restrictions of the game.
Right.
But we do that because we want to have fun.
I mean, obviously, everyone's definition of fun is different, and sometimes it involves restrictions and sometimes it involves rules. In terms of, like, say, stat generation, for the most part, that style of rolling produces characters that the players find fun to play. But there are some times when I long for a game that's like, what if you did play those farmers?
Yeah.
And you are thrust into an extraordinary situation, and it's something like 3d6 in order, and see what kind of characters those come up with. Because I'll be honest, I've played that.
Well, no, we've played a game where we did 3d6 in a row, drop the lowest, because isn't it the Blackrock game or whichever one?
Blackrock Mountain, we did a similar method. I think I might have let y'all switch around some stats.
You let us switch one stat.
You switch, yeah.
You could switch. It was 3d6 in a row, and you could switch one. Flip 2, and that was it, because that's where I had Aegon II, and he was like my second or third character.
Yeah.
But he finally actually lived for a while. It was pretty awesome. But I think my biggest stat on that was like a 14 strength.
Easily.
And everything else was like average to 9, 8.
Average to nothing. I guess as long as we're kind of talking about the older editions of the game versus newer editions of the game, really we're talking about like a TSR versus Wizards of the Coast breakdown. I think that the value of revisiting those older editions of the game, number one, they're fun in and of themselves. Some of them are very clunky.
Yeah.
But guess what? Sometimes 3rd edition was clunky as well.
Have more than 2 fighters in your party above 12th level, and see if you get anywhere.
Keep it under 2 books.
And keep it under 2 books. Yeah.
I think there's value in going back there because you can see how the game was played. It gives you a different perspective, and playing with a character that is 3d6 in order, and looking at that and going, I have a 5 in one of my stats.
I have a 5 con.
But this guy's survived 8 sessions, so I'm just having to live with it. Right. And it really sort of, to me, it was a very freeing experience from a player perspective when I started playing those games, because I stopped obsessing about the stats, and I was just like, you know what? Nothing on my character sheet matters. It is how I approach the game that makes this fun. For me. Right. And so I think that taking that attitude and applying it to 5th edition is, I'll start with a 12 or a 14 and something. I know 16 is kind of the baseline for a primary stat, but it doesn't need to be. Yeah. And maybe it's okay if the DM says, this is kind of how I see my world, and this is how the classes are set up, this is how the races are set up. It's not a free-for-all. There are restrictions. And maybe one of them is like, if you're playing a wizard and you specialize in a school, maybe spells outside of your school, or they cost more to learn, or you can't learn past 3rd level. Using limitations and restrictions to shape your world and to make it more interesting, and it doesn't have to mean that nobody can have any fun.
Well, I completely agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
That was a dead end.
That's all right. A lot of ours are dead ends. They just end. The conversation's over. Go home. I need to pick my nose. There's a bunch of stuff. Is there a Kleenex around here somewhere? Do you want me to get it on camera? I'll pick my nose on camera.
Some Kleenex behind my desk here.
The height of 3rd edition was like, how dare the DM tell me I can't bring my half-dragon, fairy, vampire lorecaster to their hardcore medievalist game. It was like, there was one time I tried to restrict and be like, everybody has to be human. I don't care what else it is, you got to be at least human. And we had a player who would not let it go. Want to be an elf? No, you can't. Just anything else but that. Anything. Just gotta be a human. And it just was like the biggest fight to try to get the buy-in for that. But 3rd edition was like, you'd go to the player advice forums and you'd hear things like, if the DM doesn't let you play your exact special snowflake character, burn down their house. You're like, all right, it's time to chill out here. Yeah. Perhaps the pendulum hath swung too far in one direction.
He thinks the pendulum doth swing too much.
Yeah. I was almost going to call this one the Tyranny of Fun, or how to kill your player's sense of entitlement. But I don't think that's
or how to
quite
kill
the
your
message.
players.
That isn't quite, quite the
Sentiment.
message that we want to send. Everybody must be having fun. Are you having your required amount of fun, citizen?
Have you taken in your daily allotment of fun?
Have you taken in your fun?
I noticed your fun quotient is 10% below what it was this time last year.
10%. I'm just going to get everybody. Look at everybody. Let me clean my nose out on camera.
Perhaps
we should adjust your dosage of Allswell.
Of Allswell, the fun drug. Not in the way you think.
It is a fun drug to take and a fun...
I just don't want to have so much fun. It's just, there's too much fun.
You end up like Slurms McKenzie.
Yes, it's just too much. Sometimes
just partying all the time, man. They don't let me stop.
Feel something else.
Yeah, because if you never have a low, can you really appreciate all the highs?
I don't think so.